finish at 1 under par. Chad Brendel joins us, BearcatJournal.com. What a year it was for Cincinnati in getting to the college football semifinals. And Chad, thanks for your time. We appreciate it a lot. So what do they do for an encore, my man?
Well, you try to run it back, right? You find out whether or not Luke Fickell has stocked this program with as much talent as we think he has. And the interesting part for UC fans, the last 3 recruiting classes, so these guys that have been waiting behind Desmond Ridder and Ahmad Gardner and so on, were the 3 highest rated recruiting classes in program history. So we've seen him do more with less. Let's see what he can do with more.
So what is the battle to replace Desmond Ridder look like right now?
It's interesting because I think many around the program thought they brought back in Ben Bryant, which Ben Bryant was the guy that was behind Desmond Ridder for 3 years, the first 3 years of Desmond Ridder's career. And then when Des decided to come back, Ben Bryant went to Eastern Michigan in the MAC and started and, had a really good year, threw for over 3,000 yards, 14 touchdowns, and then came back. So they basically sent him down to the minors. And then they called him back up. And people kind of believed with his experience, he was going to be really difficult to beat when this quarterback battle heated up. But I tell you what, the highest rated recruit in Cincinnati football history, Evan Prater, is not going out without a fight. It has been a really fun spring to watch these two guys go back and forth and watch one guy have a big day and then the next day the other guy answers. So it's been a really good spring. It's been a very healthy competition. And the interesting thing is Brian is more of the traditional pocket passing, big arm, textbook quarterback, where Prater's got a big arm, but he can really run. And there's a lot of times back there when you see him get out in space, you're like, oh, he kind of looks a lot like Des out there. So it's been a lot of fun to watch the two of them compete.
We've talked to a lot of Baylor players and coaches who, whenever you bring up last year, they acknowledge it very briefly and then move on. And they, it's in the past. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have any bearing really on this year, other than it just let them know, like, hey, this is what we can accomplish when we work hard. Has there been a similar mentality that although Cincinnati's experiencing these great heights, that last year was last year and it's up to this year's team to build off and create their own story?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because so many of those pieces are gone, right? I mean, Cincinnati's looking at 8, potentially 9 guys are going to get drafted at the end of the month. And, the identity, the core of that team, the leadership of that team is gone. So this is essentially a very new feel, a very new type of team in comparison. Like when you look at, 2 years ago when they went to the Peach Bowl and they lost to Georgia, most of that team returned. There were a couple guys that moved on, but Ridder and Gardner and, like the Kobe Bryant and all the names that became household names this year, they were all back. This time it's got a different feel to it. So I think it's a lot of guys looking to prove themselves and a lot of guys that didn't get a lot of time last year to kind of rely on that. You know what I mean? Like that thought process that we're running it back. This isn't running it back. This is more, we got to prove we've got some staying power now.
Chad, I had a question for us on our text line. When you talk to Chad, I'm curious to know how many 4- and 5-star recruits are now able to get from big high schools from Cincinnati and Dayton?
That's going to be interesting. They just lost out on a tough one. They had their number one target was a kid named Malik Hartford that they did a phenomenal job recruiting, but Ohio State hired away Cincinnati's DB coach and put him at Malik Hartford's position, and now Malik Hartford is going to Ohio State. So that's a tough one. The reality is you're probably not going to beat out Ohio State on those kids, but Ohio State is very selective in Ohio. So there are some kids that, they're going to have a chance to go after, especially the local ones, which, now that you're going to be in the Big 12 and you've got a history of winning, you've got a proven coach and a proven culture. Each year it's going to be easier and easier to knock down those doors.
Yeah, the good news is they don't have to beat Ohio State, except for once in a blue moon. So, Chad, you mentioned the draft at the end of the month. I was curious what you thought Desmond Ridder really slots out as somebody who watched him over his career.
I may be biased here, but you're starting to hear this more and more and more. I think he's the number one quarterback in the draft because I think he is that complete package of arm talent, leadership, knowledge, ability to run. I mean, Cincinnati ran a very pro-style offense. If you look at their passing concepts and the way that they operated, he knows how to read defenses. He knows how to get in and out of his checks. And he's a guy that we heard stories when he was a true freshman, when he was redshirting. Like, we heard stories then about how guys just flocked to him as a leader. We saw it play out for 4 years. He's benefited from the fact this isn't a draft with a Trevor Lawrence or somebody like, major at the top of it. But I think as more and more NFL teams are getting to know him, you're starting to hear his name come up as that number one quarterback more often. I think probably middle of the first round, somewhere right around 15 to 20 sounds about right. But I wouldn't be shocked if somebody falls in love with him over this month through the visit process and takes him early.
Chad, what was the reaction around Cincinnati with the news about Bob Bowlesby stepping down as Big 12 commissioner?
Not a lot of reaction yet. I don't think the fan base is like hyper engaged on the Big 12. I think that'll probably happen when they have a date. Like, Cincinnati starts July 1st, 2023. I think the focus will turn then. I think that there was, some curiosity. A lot of people wondering how much say Cincinnati would have in the new commissioner. I tried to explain to them very little. As I explained it last night on one of our YouTube shows, I said, look, Cincinnati just bought a house in the neighborhood. You don't buy the house in the neighborhood and then control the homeowners association at the same time. That's not how this stuff works. You got to build a little equity in the neighborhood before you start calling the shots. There's people that are at least keeping an eye on it, but I don't think it has drawn a ton of attention yet, because I think people are just waiting to hear, like, this is the day that Cincinnati's in the Big 12.
Chad, is there a sense that after the crazy game of musical chairs that we had in college football coaching, and Luke Fickell stared down many opportunities he could have thrown his hat in and stayed at Cincinnati, that if I know that it'll never be like this because his name's always going to come up when a big job comes up, but if he could stare down those jobs and say no, that outside of Ohio State maybe coming open, that people are at ease?
Yeah, I think he's made it pretty clear. Are there a couple things he would listen to, or, he's always going to, keep his options at least somewhat open. But as long as Cincinnati is doing what he feels needs to be done to push the program forward and to compete at the highest levels of the sport, he's happy here. And I know it's hard for people to believe that, because so many coaches have said that and just been talking out their rear end. But Luke Fickell's a different guy. Like, generally, if he says something, he means it. And, it's been really interesting to watch play out. The Notre Dame thing, like, Cincinnati got lucky, if you want me to be honest, in my opinion, because any other year, he would have listened. And who knows what would have came out of that. But with his team playing for a championship and occupied through the first of the year, he told Notre Dame, look, if you want to talk, you can come talk. You guys heard about what he did with his contract, right?
I don't know if we did. When was it and what was it?
So what happened was week 7, his athletic director went into his office and said, Luke, here's your contract. Here's your extension. And it was, a $1 million a year raise. And Luke said, thanks, but I'm busy right now. I'm going to put this in my briefcase, and we'll talk about it after the season. And that's what he did with Notre Dame. That's what he did with everybody that called. He's like, I'm busy. I got things to take care of. I got work to do. If you want to talk to me about business that's outside of this team, you're going to have to talk to me after the season. And that's how authentic Luke Fickell is. Could you imagine just throwing $1 million a year raise in your briefcase and be like, we'll get back to that in 2 months?
You know, that is not quite the same, but it's very much similar to Dave Aranda. When all the chirping was going on, as all these these jobs opened up, LSU and USC and others as well. I mean, he and Mac Rhodes talked every day, but basically he didn't want to have anything to do with that until they had taken care of all their business, and even then waited until his staff was finalized much later after they'd won the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole new world when you have a coach that you can trust. And Cincinnati has been in a situation where, Brian Kelly, Butch Jones, Mark D'Antonio even, they were always looking for their, that big ride out of town. And Luke Fickell just seems content. If something crazy comes along that blows him away, I'd never stay. Like, he's going to be here for his whole career or whatever the case may be. But he's the one guy that has earned the respect of, if he says it, you believe him because he's been honest so far. So you take somebody at their word, right?
Yep.
Well, and Chad, I think we're kind of in a new spot with a lot of coaches where, if the money is as great as it is, and it's great, it's got to be great everywhere. Now, I know that sometimes you get bowled over and be like, well, I'm going to have to take $9 million. I mean, when are you going to get a chance to do that? But what's the difference between $5 million and $6 million if the state you're going to might have more taxes and the place you're going to might be a bigger headache than the one you're already at, and your kids are happy, your wife's happy, you like your golf course and everything like that? Like, why leave?
The grass isn't always greener, I think, is what a lot of coaches have learned. How many of these guys have been on the come up and they're climbers and they keep climbing and climbing and climbing. And then they get to a rung of the ladder that was too big for them. And next thing you know, that guaranteed, I'm happy $4 million a year becomes, I got my $7 million a year, but I also got fired. And now I have to go be an assistant coach again.
Yep.
I think they're looking around and realizing that that's the reality that's out there right now.
Chad, thank you very much for being a part of it. Can't wait as we close in, as we count it down eventually to the Big 12 and adding Cincinnati, UCF, Houston, and also Brigham Young. And also prayers to Kelly, your wife, as she continues to be as tough a person as you could imagine. Thanks for your time today.
Appreciate you guys, and always love jumping on and talking with you. Anytime you need me, you know where to find me.
Yes, sir. That's Chad Brendel again, BearcatJournal.com for 247 Sports Network. When we come back, Mickey Spagnola, DallasCowboys.com.